Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving right into the untold story of Michael Jackson. We're going to move way past the flashing cameras, those deafening crowd screams, and the iconic silhouettes to really uncover the deeply complex guy hiding behind the music. If you've ever wanted to understand how literally one single person could alter music, dance, and fashion on a massive global scale, and let's be honest, the psychological toll that kind of unprecedented influence takes, well, you're in exactly the right place. So, as you see here, there are celebrities and then there are legends. It's so true, right? Look, some saw Michael as this unparalleled, once-in-a-generation genius, while others, they viewed him as a complete and total mystery. But there's one absolute, undeniable truth we have to acknowledge. He wasn't just a famous musician. He operated on an entirely different level. He didn't just participate in pop culture, he completely dictated it. But the crucial anchor of this entire explainer is actually a pretty heavy one. Behind those massive world tours, the multi-platinum records, and millions of screaming fans, there was an intensely lonely man. He was carrying the immense, crushing pressure of being the biggest star on Earth. To really grasp how he got there and why that pressure shaped his whole reality, we have to rewind a bit and look at where he started. Which brings us to Section 1, the early years. Let's set the scene. Michael Joseph Jackson was born in 1958 in Gary, Indiana, a tough working-class steel mill town. Picture this. He grew up in a tiny house packed with 9 siblings. His father, Joe, was incredibly strict and demanded absolute perfection. Rehearsals were grueling. Mistakes not tolerated. From a very young age, Michael was pushed to his absolute limits. But, something about him was genuinely just different. The second he stepped on stage, his voice, his rhythm, his energy, he just commanded the room. Even as a little kid, he had this undeniable star power, executing choreography and vocals that grown adults struggled with. By age 11, he was already performing like a seasoned superstar. By the late 1960s, Michael and his brothers formed the Jackson 5. And wow, they became a national obsession basically overnight. Tracks like ABC, I Want You Back, and I'll Be There turned them into global stars. Fun fact, they were actually the first group in history to have their first 4 major label singles hit #1 on the Billboard Hot 100. But even in that hugely successful group, little Michael stood out. He was the undeniable frontman, carrying the massive weight of the entire group's success before he even hit his teenage years. Moving right along to Section 2, Becoming the King. All right, this brings us to a moment that literally changed music history forever, the release of Thriller in 1982. Now, this wasn't just a hit album. It fundamentally rescued the entire music industry from a massive slump and shattered historic racial barriers on TV. Tracks like Billie Jean, Beat It, and, of course, Thriller became inescapable global anthems. To put it in perspective, the album spent an astonishing 37 non-consecutive weeks at #1. It is still, to this day, the best-selling album of all time. Crazy, right? But he didn't just make music. He completely reinvented the visual landscape. First off, he transformed music videos. He took them from these basic, low-budget promo clips and turned them into massive cinematic events, like that incredible 14-minute short film for Thriller. Then came the moment that absolutely shocked the world. During a live TV broadcast from Motown 25, he unveiled the moonwalk for the very first time. The audience was left completely speechless. From that exact moment forward, he was officially crowned the King of Pop. Minutes, just minutes. That is literally all it took for his massive, record-breaking stadium tours to sell out in the 80s and 90s. He was this unstoppable force of nature. His concerts were so emotionally overwhelming that they actually had to station paramedics throughout the stadiums. Why? Because fans would literally faint at the mere sight of him just standing silently on stage. No joke. And his influence bled into almost everything we consume today. Think about it. He dictated fashion with the military jackets, that single white glove, the fedora. He set the gold standard for modern pop choreography. He wasn't just participating in these spaces, he was redefining them. He was a worldwide phenomenon, setting a benchmark for global fame that absolutely no one had ever reached before. Let's transition over to Section 3, the price of fame. Imagine millions of people obsessing over your every single move. We're talking relentless tabloid scandals, non-stop rumors about your changing appearance, flashing cameras documenting your entire existence. That was his public reality. Now, contrast that. Imagine going back to a luxury hotel suite and experiencing absolute crushing isolation. Michael realized, quite tragically, that he'd spent his entire youth rehearsing and performing for the world, leaving him with no real childhood at all. That trauma of those lost years under his father's strict rule, it really began to profoundly shape his private reality. So in an attempt to recreate the childhood he never had, he built this massive, 2,700-acre fantasy world called Neverland Ranch. It had full-scale amusement park rides, a private zoo, movie theaters, the whole shebang. For some, it was this beautiful, magical paradise, a deeply psychological attempt to capture his lost youth. But to others, well, as we see here, it became an eerie, deeply polarizing symbol of media controversy and eccentric isolation. Which naturally brings us to Section 4, Controversies and Trials. Throughout the 90s and 2000s, the narrative really shifted. He faced intense, relentless legal scrutiny. The entire world watched as his life turned from these incredible musical triumphs into non-stop court proceedings. In 2005, after a highly publicized and incredibly exhausting trial, he was found not guilty on all charges. However, that trial left a permanent mark. The public remained fiercely divided. Some believed in his absolute, unwavering innocence, while others simply never trusted him again. The sheer weight of that trial took a devastating physical and emotional toll on him. Now we look at Section 5, a tragic end. Let's jump to 2009. There was this massive glimmer of hope. Over in London, Michael announced a highly anticipated comeback residency called This Is It. Man, it sent ripples of absolute excitement across the globe. The demand was so historically massive that the sheer volume of fans trying to buy tickets literally crashed the servers. It signaled to everyone that finally, the King of Pop was preparing to return to his throne. But before the tour could even begin, tragedy struck. On June 25, 2009, Michael Jackson died suddenly at his home in Los Angeles. He was only 50 years old. Just completely heartbreaking. The immediate aftermath was completely unprecedented in modern history. The sheer scale of global mourning was so massive that the sudden surge in web traffic actually crashed major parts of the internet. I'm talking Google, Twitter, Wikipedia. Millions of people poured into the streets all over the world. Fans gathered outside his LA home, his childhood house in Gary, the Apollo Theater, just in deep grief. Tributes flooded in from quite literally every single country on Earth. It proved, in a very sudden and tragic way, just how deeply he... Finally, let's turn to Section 6, the enduring legacy. So what's the takeaway here? Well, today, the echo of the king remains absolutely deafening. Modern pop and R&B artists still meticulously study his vocal tics, his stage presence, his choreography. His music continues to stream in the billions, continuing to break records long after his passing. Whether people choose to focus on the deep, controversial complexities of his personal life or the sheer, undeniable genius of his art, one truth is rock solid. He permanently changed the landscape of entertainment forever. When you consider the whole picture, the intense childhood pressure, the unmatched natural talent, that compounding psychological weight of global fame, and a life lived entirely on the world stage, it leaves us with one really powerful thought, perfectly captured by this quote. Perhaps there will never be another artist like him again. The specific environment that forged him, both the amazing triumphs and the deep traumas, it simply cannot be replicated. So, I'm going to leave you with this final question to ponder based on everything we've covered in this explainer. Looking at the unmatched highs of his art, the massive barriers he shattered, and the deeply tragic complexities of his reality behind the curtain, was he the greatest entertainer in history? Let me know your take in the comments below, and as always, keep learning.